You are now tuned in to the Project 365 experience.
The Skull.
Welcome back to the Project 365 podcast. I am your host, Coach O. Joining you guys right after Boston Celtics have won 106-99 and are one win away from the NBA championship. It's really grim in Dallas right now because you are looking at a situation that no team has ever came back from. Teams that are down 3-0 are 0-156 up until now. There's not a lot of hope in Dallas, but to break down and discuss, we are joined by, again, my good friend, Josué Sédrjo. Josué, how you doing?
I'm doing well. Like you said, I'm doing better than a lot of Dallas Mavericks fans. Probably some Dallas Mavericks coaches who haven't slept a lot the last 24 hours, the last week, but especially the last 24 hours. But before they get ready for Game 4 tonight, they need to look back onto Game 3, and that's what we're going to do today.
You know, I've been wanting to use the word grim. Like, I think, like, there's no more other way to really describe it. That's really what it is. Like, I think, like, you know, you go into these series, like, you dream of getting to the NBA Finals, and you get the chance to be in it. This is probably not the kind of output that you would have imagined in your first time in this series. And I think, like, there comes this point where it's like, okay, pride has to kick in at some point.
I mean, as a competitor, you never think of yourself as, oh, yeah, we're going to go in this series and get killed. Like, no, the competitor in you thinks you're going to win the series, especially in professional sports where you don't get that many opportunities. I mean, some guys go their entire careers without even getting to the NBA Finals, let alone win an NBA championship. So, yeah, it goes without saying that you would like to be able to seize every opportunity, but unfortunately, that's not how the cookie crumbles.
Agreed. Going into this game, two key factors that we really wanted to hone in on. I think first of all, we have to talk about the news. Kristaps Porzingis was ruled out before that. We're just being able to just understand, and we had talked about it in our previous podcast about different things that Boston would have to look into doing without Kristaps. But like we said, that Dallas didn't have to worry about that. Dallas just had to, you know, put out a full-on effort on that. And I think the next one was we were waiting on the Kyrie game, and we finally got the Kyrie game, Josué.
We did. And this gives us a chance to review, once again, the assignment we give for the Dallas Mavericks students and see how they did in comparison to that. And that's the starting point. That was the first part. We needed an aggressive Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving from the jump throughout the game, consistently putting up a higher level of shot attempts and keeping a decent amount of efficiency to carry Dallas to a win. Well, they scored 37 of the first 51 points for Dallas at the half. At that time, you're on pace for 74 points. We had talked that we thought they needed at least over 65, if not 70. So up to that point, they were checking the assignment as completed. They finished with a combined 62, so not as much points as you wish. And on top of that, 24-55 shooting, so not as efficiently as you wished. And Luka fouled out for the last 4.5 minutes. More importantly, and I think this is where it's really telling on how good the Boston Celtics defense and how I'm going to say hurt or lack of energy or fuel Luka has right now with his multiple injuries. They were both 5 of 12 at the rim, combined 5 of 12 at the rim. So they partially completed the assignment. They completed as well as they've done all series. Like you said, Kyrie was started incredibly hot, was aggressive throughout, but he finished 13 of 28, right? And 28 shot attempts is good from a sense of we needed him to have a big game. He needed to have a high level of attempts, but at the same time, you saw the last 5 minutes, he ran out of gas. We had talked about playing the game in the mud, the pace, the free throw attempts, the offensive rebound. Well, pace-wise, it was the lowest pace that this series has had, 90 possessions versus 93 in game 2, 91 in game 1. So that's a little better, but not as, and you could see in the game stylistically, it wasn't as slow pace as it needed to be for Dallas to have an advantage. So assignment not complete. Free throw attempts, Dallas won that one 16-14. Only, again, 16 attempts total overall. That's not good enough. X. And then finally, the offensive rebounds. Dallas won this battle 7-6. So they won it, but only by one, and only 7 in total. Now, there was some time when in the fourth as they were making a comeback, but again, it needed to be a wide margin for them for that to be a story of the game. Like Dallas killing Boston on the offensive glass, and it wasn't the case. And when you're looking at these 4 elements of the assignment and you lose by 7, well, it explains a lot very clearly into why you're down 3-0 in the series.
I want to connect the 2 points that we just started this conversation with Kyrie and Porzingis being out. You got a sense that with Porzingis being out, the paint was a bit more clear. And, you don't have 7-2 just waiting at the rim, waiting to swat your shot and whatnot. And we know Al Horford is kind of more of a positional big, I'm going to say, with all due respect to Al Horford. I know he's a good anchor, but I don't really see him as like a shot blocking big in the back line. Dallas had never had a plus 10 point advantage in this series up until this game. And the way that they got this advantage was that, one, obviously Kyrie, give a lot of this to Kyrie and Luka being able to be aggressive, but you got a sense, especially in the first half, that Dallas made the conscientious effort to attack the paint and finish at the rim. And that's how they created that big gap. I started seeing and paying attention to that when they stopped being more assertive on the rims, it had a big domino effect on their whole game. Because when you don't score a basket and you miss, you allow a team that essentially has 5 guards to push in transition. So that puts you at a disadvantage. The next part is when you miss that layup, when you make that layup, we get to be set, right? So that gives Luka a bit more time. Luka was dealing with a lot of stuff in this game, but that gives him more time to get back on defense, right? It helps so many aspects of your game, right? So the game is very connected. And I think like there was a part of the game where I started seeing that Dallas's undisciplined offensively kind of started leading to easy baskets for Boston. Because what I realized was that every time they would score, it was a bit harder for Dallas to score. And you started seeing it. Jason Tatum had to be big in that first half. But again, Jaylen Brown was not driving as much, which I think that's another key in the first half. Jaylen Brown, we'll talk about his great second half, but in the first half, you kind of felt like Jaylen Brown didn't really have the space for him to be able to attack the way that he did in the first. And he was more willing to settle for those jump shots. And I think it has like a big domino effect on everything they want to do from a Dallas standpoint. So I don't know if you kind of saw some other things.
I mean, I think offensively, you clearly played with more energy. I mean, you felt the desperation, unlike game 1 or game 2, which goes without saying. When you're down 2-0 versus down 1-0, or starting off the series, obviously your level of desperation is going to be way higher. So first quarter, I mean, when they jump out to a 25-12 lead, I'm thinking to myself, well, this looks like the typical lower seed goes home in game 3, plays with the amount of desperation, and then let's see if the upper seed is going to match the energy. And then it might come down to a shot-making game. And we had talked about at the beginning of the series, if that's the case, advantage Dallas. However, defensively, I think in the first half, the Mavs gave themselves a chance. And then in the second half, their lapse in attention to detail were so prolonged. Maybe overall, it was certainly better than in the first 2 games. Maybe not game 2, but definitely first 2 games. But the spell were so long that they didn't give themselves a chance. I mean, when you fall behind 21 points going down the fourth, whatever you're doing defensively, I mean, at some point, like how are you supposed to mount a comeback? And we had talked about again, thanks to Second Spectrum and shout out to Jared Dubin, who does a great job covering the NBA on multiple platforms. He had tracked via Second Spectrum the blow-by rate. Again, the percentage of times where a Boston Celtic offensive player drives by a Dallas defender. So if he drives by 1 out of 2, that's a 50% rate. It was 60% in game 1, 53% in game 2, so better but not good enough. And in game 3, it was 56%. And a big part of that was because of the third quarter when Boston kind of put their foot down and established literally a championship quarter. And I mean, we were talking about this offline. When they played a documentary of every NBA championship, there's always a quarter, a stretch that looks like, slow motion. The ball is moving. You get a bench celebration. I mean, it looked like that at that time in the third quarter. So, to your point about Dallas giving themselves a chance, via the offense being, let's say, deliberate in how they were strategically attacking, was good in the beginning and then slowly faded as the game went along. And defensively, kind of the same thing, on top of the fact that the spell of lack of attention to detail were really long. Like when it went away, it was gone for a long time before it came back, and then it would be there for a decent amount of time. So when you look at the game overall, I don't think there's any way you can slice this game up and think to yourself, as a Mavericks staffer, fan, we should have won this game. Like, did you have an opportunity to win this game? Yes. But should you have won this game? If you play this game 100 times, do you win it more than 50%? I don't think that's the case.
Yeah. And it's like, from a coaching standpoint, this is where like my coaching hat kind of comes on, where it's like, in the first, Jason Kidd played, I think, was it 11 players in that game? 10 or 11
Yes, he
players?
did. Yes,
He
11.
did
Yeah.
11 players. 11 players.
Went deep on that bench. Went deep.
Yeah. So I think like when you go deep into your bench like that, like I think it kind of like shows like you're still searching for something. Like I feel like they understood I'm gonna say how delicate the situation is against a team like Boston, where it's like, even though we have this big lead, you could still sense that he didn't feel like he could settle into a rotation, Now, part of it is
searching.
Yeah, so I don't know. Part of it is maybe because, Luka was dealing with a lot. Maybe he just needed certain things. So I think that part was coming to it. But that also brings me to a next question for you. We talked about role players playing good at home.
We did.
What role? Talk to me. What are some role players that you think really stepped up for Dallas? Let's try to bring the sunshine down to Dallas. Let's do that.
Let's do that a little bit, because we had talked about the fact that from a role player standpoint, they need to generate more corner threes. We knew if it was either more corner threes or more individual brilliance from a PJ Washington, from a Derek Jones, or from a Derek Lively. And I think, especially in the fourth quarter, you saw the young man find a zone of comfort, especially in the offensive glass. There was a little more seal. There was a more purposeful in terms of attacking the offensive glass without fouling. There was certainly a high level of awareness from a defensive rebounding standpoint, as Boston was, let's say it, melting down on offense in the fourth quarter. So that's something encouraging that I know for sure they can take into game 4 and hope to replicate. At the same time, I think we need to highlight the role players on Boston, because I think they were the story of this game. I mean, we had talked about the need to fill in the backup center minutes without Kristaps Porzingis. We had said from the jump, Al would jump from about 29 minutes a game to 36, 37. He played 37. So we were right on money from that standpoint. Then we were looking at 11 minutes, and we had said 3 options. We said Xavier Tillman, we said Luke Cornett at center, or we said Jason Tatum at center. Well, Joe Mazzulla ended up going with Xavier Tillman in the entire 11 minutes, and he was good enough. We had asked, what was the assignment? Don't get killed.
Don't get killed. Be solid. Come in. Anything you give me as a bonus, and he gives you a corner 3, Josué.
And he gives you a corner 3. Forget a 2, a corner 3. I mean, if that's a beyond a bonus. Funny stat for you, because he was 1 for 1 from 3. He had a true shooting percentage of 150% because of the way the math works. And then beyond that, historical. I mean, we're saying solid. He's giving us historical true shooting percentage.
As if the Boston offense needed more to add to the historic offense that they had.
Right.
Xavier
and then his three is in the second half in that like we said, championship quarter, the Boston Celtics had in the third. In the first half, Sam Hauser 3 for 3 from three, and works splashes, like no doubters. Like he lets it go, and you're thinking to yourself, yeah, that's going in. So when you have the Boston Celtics bench giving such a contribution like that, I mean, I remember the first 6 minutes thinking like, man, if you're a Boston player or staffer, you think to yourself, man, let's keep this under 12. They were down 1. I didn't think to myself like, okay, they might have won the game, but like, I'm kind of thinking they might have won the game just because that the fact that they had, and in big part to Hauser at that time, cut that deficit and already had established their offense as, okay, we're not going to be terrible. Now, we need to spend some time. We had talked about, we talked about the Dallas role players. Let's give a mention to Dante Exum and that dunk in the first quarter. You know, when you go home and you have the right pregame meal, maybe that Dallas barbecue wasn't available in Boston. All of a sudden you do things you haven't done before. So you know, nice a poster Dante Exum dunk. There you go. That's that'd be one for example. No disparaging comments. I mean, he has that size, athleticism, but it was just as he did it, I was thinking to myself, yes, of course, role player play home and have amazing plays. But I think it's time to spend some time, you know, like we talked about the style of the game. We talked about some stats. Now some stories. The third quarter and the fourth quarter. I think the Boston Celtics in the third quarter and then the Boston Celtics in the fourth quarter. Let me set up the table for our discussion here.
Please.
Third quarter, 13 of 20 from the field. So that's 65% from the field. Boston Celtics offense. 5 for 11 from 3. 4 of 4 in free throw attempts, 8 assists, no turnovers. Meanwhile, the Dallas Mavericks are 8 of 21 from the field, and it's a 35-19 overall score in favor of Boston in the third quarter. Basically, perfect offense, perfect defense. In the fourth quarter, 7 of 18 from the field, so 39% from the field for the Boston Celtics. 3 of 8 from 3. 4 of 4 in free throw attempts. Thank God, as the game was, as they were crawling to the finish line. At least they made the free throws when it was, you know, when Dallas was fouling, trying to get back in the game. 5 assists, but 5 turnovers. But thank Lord for them that Dallas ran out of gas. So they were 9 of 21 from the field, and it was a 29-21 Boston Celtic advantage. And I think let's do one quarter at a time. So third quarter, sometimes basketball is really simple. When you have 5-man offense personnel and the other team doesn't have 5-man defensive, 5-man out, 5 out, right? 5 out offensive personnel versus non-5 out defensive personnel. The offense is going to win. Like if you have your offense can play 5 out and the other team can't fully guard 5 out, you're going to win. It's kind of what happened in that quarter, right? Like, Boston decided we are going to play to our strength and do the right things or right process, which is multiple drives, multiple kicks, multiple threes. Looked amazing. Beyond the fact that Dallas can't really stop him. We talked about the blow-by rate. We talked about the fact that Luka is dealing with a knee issue. He's getting injections for that. Chest injury. He's getting injections for that. Already not the most mobile or the most committed perimeter defender. I mean, they were attacking him in zone. Oh, like that when you're getting drove by in zone in the corner. I mean, things are bad. So if Boston is going to be committed like that to their offense, it's going to look like that. And they look like a championship quarter at the time.
You know, I would be remiss if I didn't talk about Jaylen Brown in that second half. I would be remiss. It seemed like when they needed a shot, because I went the other way. I was looking at, okay, Jason Tatum's more aggressive this game. Maybe Jaylen Brown's not going to have that. But the way, like, he provided Boston with so many timely buckets. And you got to think that right now he's ahead for winning that finals MVP.
Most likely. We're talking about 24, 6 and 6 averaging in this series, 30 points, 8 assists, 8 rebounds in this game. His shooting splits are 55, 25, 70. I mean, I think the 55% from the field is the main story. The 25% speaks to he's still a Celtic, so the process is still not going to be great.
Yeah.
And the 70, well, he missed a ton of free throws in game 1. it was a blowout. So the line is not perfect, but that game and that quarter, I think pushed him ahead to say Drew Holiday or, had Jason Tatum had a good game. I think he's putting themselves ahead of those guys.
Mm-hmm. Talk about these two. Talk about these two, just the synergy, just the growth. And I don't want to get ahead, but they're really close to winning an NBA championship. Um, Going into this last game, like this really like feels like this potentially could be like the final game. Talk a little bit about just what those two went through to get to that, like to be on the brink of that kind of happening. The reason why I'm asking you this question because like I want to know like, is it gonna be like I hope there's no like outside noise that gets into them because they've been playing so well together. But do you think that this is kind of like more just of a testament to an organization sticking with two players? I'm putting them at the cornerstone and then just sticking through, like we like coined the term, the process, because it's so nice to see a team play good basketball. And I think that's what I'm taking away from this final is that there's still teams playing 5-on-5 basketball. There's still 5 players. There's still, you look at it, this game, they went only 8 deep. They settle into their rotation. And for me, what was super important about that is every big shot that they made, they flashed it on the bench. And then the energy and the happy, like, it kind of gives you like this idea. I don't know if you kind of see it that way, Josué.
It's an interesting reflection. I
Mm,
mean, you could go really long on this because if you go season by season, you could literally go from, yes, this duo is the answer. They got it. They have this it factor. And for you could say that 1 year, you could say that 2 years, and then you could go the complete other way and be like, no, this is not going to work. We need to move on, and have that thought for 1 or 2 years. I think going year by year is a different podcast because
yeah.
I genuinely believe that you need to look at season by season roster support around them. I mean, there were multiple edition of this team, right? There's the non-Kyrie team, there's the Kyrie team, there's them as the main pieces with Marcus Smart, there's them with the main pieces with now Drew Holiday, Kristaps Porzingis. I mean, there are multiple evolution of this team. I think the takeaway simply needs to be when a good team from a talent standpoint legitimately have 6, if not 7 quality NBA starters, have on top of that 2 guys that can elevate the team offensively when their mind is right, elevated offensively to a top 25, top 20 player in the NBA. And that 6 or 7 are all two-way players. It just gives you as a team a floor that's higher than most teams' ceiling. So from the jump already, you're thinking to yourself, as one of those top 2 players, if we have a bad game, we are going to be supported in a way most teams are not going to be. And I think the takeaway needs to be that. I think it needs to be about the supporting cast being so good that when those 2 guys that are talented enough to have a very good fastball, maybe not a top 5 NBA players fastball, but in these finals, if you want to make the case that Jalen Brown's a top 20, top 25 player, I mean, I wouldn't listen to higher, but at least I wouldn't agree to higher, but I'd listen to the argument of some sort, just in terms of how well he's played. And on top of that, you have that supporting cast. Yeah, of course you want to believe in those 2 guys. They went, which I mentioned, the 4 additions of the team. On top of that, they started their careers in a winning team. I mean, most guys, when they get drafted, they start at the bottom, right? And you got to work your way out. You got to lose, 60 games for 2 or 3 years. We got to, go through trades. There's guys that are trying to figure out, am I going to get my money? Am I not going to get? I mean, there's usually in the evolution of the quote unquote young superstar, a lot more trials and tribulations that they went through. Not that they didn't go through some, just their path was, I mean, it kind of started already at second base, right? If you're taking the baseball analogy with how good the team was. So the takeaway needs to be, if you start that far ahead, make sure you don't waste the advantage. And it took them a longer time, I think, that they wanted as a staff, as a players, to get, turn around third base and do the turn home. But I think now they are clearly at that point. And I would like to think, especially when they pop the tape and look at the third versus the fourth quarter, that they're going to be able to identify, guys, if we do this 4 more times, that third quarter, if we do this 4 more times, we're NBA champions. And nobody can take that away from us. And whatever narrative you want to use about we can't play together, blah, blah, all that can go away because we've done it.
Agreed.
I think it's that simple.
Agreed. So so what's the message? Your coach in the locker room. What's the message going into game 4?
Well, let's talk about Dallas first, because I think they're the ones that are clearly in the most trouble here. But before we dive on the Celtics, I mean, the assignment is the same, right? We talked about playing the game in the mud. We talked about Luka and Kyrie needed to be excellent. I don't think that can change. I think that's still the answer for them to be able to figure out a way to win the game. It is possible, and I would like to submit this to you. I think Dallas needs to go all offense. So when there's a situation where they need to think offense versus defense, who are we putting in? What are we strategizing? I think the only thing they haven't tried yet is all offense. What do you think?
I think that's where you're right. And there was a point in the game where I was thinking that, especially with the way that they, like the flow of their offense, they're kind of trying to push it in transition to see if they have something. But if they don't have anything, that's when the offense kind of stagnates. I think if they go all offense the way that you're saying, I think that's where it could kind of like open up some things, right? So I was really happy to see Tim Hardaway Jr. In the game. That's only because
in and out, man. His 1-3 attempt, and you saw like the little jump he had after he let it go. It was at check. It was 66-61, right? He makes that down 2, and then more energy. I mean, maybe you're trying to replicate that in game 4, right?
So as he shot that and it rattled in, I was getting ready to shoot you a text. I was like, dude, but I'm like, he's the type of player that like either he's gonna give you 11, or he's gonna give you 2, or he's gonna give you 0. Like he's very streaky like that, right? So, but again, that's one of those shot makers that ties into what you're trying to say is potentially this might be maybe we got to go all offense. And I think the final lineup that they had in there, when they had Kyrie, Tim Hardaway, Derek Jones, Gafford, and PJ, I think potentially that's a lineup that at times can, provide a bit of spark, because I think PJ is now in a mindset of attack, put pressure. So, which is pretty good. I think Gafford has to continue being Gafford and maybe provide a bit more, right? But I agree with you. I think potentially there may be a room for them to be able to go in selective choices. Like they have to be a bit more selective. But the hardest game to finish is the closeout game, right? So in a weird way, Dallas potentially has the advantage psychologically because the desperation kicks in. And that's something that you have to factor going into this. But I agree with you. Potentially going all offense may be something that they have to do. But if there's one thing they have to fix, transition defense, because they're not getting it. They're not getting any stops. They're not getting any stops. And when the stops that they're not getting, right, they lead to like flagrant like baskets. It's either two-handed dunks. Like you got to consider that these are also there's also points on the board, but there's those emotional momentum points. When you see Jason Tatum hold the rim 2 hands like a big man and then just hang on that. Me, if I'm Boston, like it's not just a 2-point dunk. To me, psychologically, that gives me an extra boost, right? So I think like there's that part that Dallas has to be more in control of. Transition defense for them definitely has to be better. But again, I agree with you. I think if they are able to set up their defense, just make it hard on Boston, because in a closeout game, you know what Boston is going to do. In the short clock, it's going to go to Jaylen Brown. It's going to go to Jason Tatum. And hopefully, sidestep threes. If you could get a couple of those, and if Jason Tatum doesn't hit them, that allows you to push the ball in transition. And that's where I think you could have a lot of success.
So there's a push and pull of Boston versus themselves, and Dallas deciding to attempt to force them into bad habits. And I think I'm I'm conflicted. On one hand, the assignment that we said was make this game ugly, right? We said in the mud, offensive rebounds, draw fouls, make sure your stars are scoring as much as they can consistently throughout the game, and slow the pace down. So clearly that hasn't worked for 3 games, but we know that's the formula to win. On the other hand, the one thing they haven't tried is all offense, but Maxi Kleber's dealing with a shoulder injury. He's clearly not right. Like, he barely takes any threes, doesn't even think about it. I mean, what if you're not giving us a stretch element, what are you really bringing to the table? That's your number one quality. We talk about Tim Hardaway Jr., like dusting him off, like, okay, he might give us 11, he might give us 0. We kind of need him to score 20. I don't know how likely is it that he gives us 20. I don't know. But then if we try to make the game ugly and that doesn't work, maybe we need to turn around to Tim Hardaway and say, hey, man, just go crazy. Like, let's just try to set up for as many driving kicks or maybe handoffs. Like, let's just play the variance with the 3-point attempt game. Maybe that's how we generate something, and then bet on the energy, the crowd, and all that environment forcing Boston into bad habits. The thing, though, is you're 1 game away from the championship. As a Boston staffer, as a player, mentally, what do you need to prepare and expect is that, like, you are going into this game thinking to yourself, if our defense is elite, excellent, as good as it can be, I don't see a scenario where even if our offense tanks, we lose the game. If our defense is like that today, even more so than the offense, I don't see a scenario where we lose, because we're going to limit the role players. If our defense is like that, that means Drew and Jaylen Brown have figured out a way to stop Kyrie and Luka, or at least contain them. So even if our offense is mediocre, if our defense is truly elite, like if we decide, all of us, to lock in, pay attention to details, play with energy throughout, and as a coaching staff, make sure that you match lineups and minutes and, manage foul trouble as well as you can, they're not going to lose. So to me, as a Boston staffer, the mentality going into this game needs to be about the defense. On Dallas, it needs to be probably about the offense, even though I'm not sure that's the right answer. On Boston, it has to be about the defense. Especially, like I said, they're gonna pop the tape. Every this. Every team does that, right? You watch the game tape of the previous game. You're in the film room. We're all going through the details, calling out what we need to do, when we need to change. Hey, man, Coach Mazzulla gonna pop the third quarter tape. He's gonna be like, guys, this is perfect. If we do this, there's no way we lose. But the offense, like, we know, you saw in game 2, right? Like, they were 6 of 30 at some point from the 3-point range. Like, there are variants there, even though if you generate good shots, sometimes it just doesn't go in. But the process was good. So if you're on that coaching staff, you're telling the Celtics players, process of the third quarter, defensive mentality, and locking in, as in your life depends on it. You do that, we're NBA champs.
Yeah. And I think, like, that's kind of like where it is. Like, Boston's always also going into this with, I think, like, you gotta kind of break the game down in certain segments for you to be able to have success.
Yeah,
right?
probably.
So
probably you got to go quarter by quarter, right?
You
like
have
the shorter span you think, I think that will increase the awareness and the concentration of the Boston Celtics players, for sure.
Agreed. I don't think they go into, like, as a coach, I don't think you're going into the first quarter being like, oh, let's create as big of a lead as possible in the first. I don't think that's probably what Joe Mazzulla is probably going to say. I think if I'm him, I'm probably looking at how engaged are we defensively in the first quarter. I'm looking at the quality of shots towards the second, and then I slowly start shortening my bench. And to be honest, they're probably going to go 8 deep, to be honest. I think they're going into it. I think
they'll do the same thing.
Yeah,
I think they're doing the same thing. For sure.
Yeah,
I mean, maybe Horford, this might be a 42-minute Al Horford game, right? Like, Al, you got to give us 42. Like, if you have to, you have to. I'm not trying to go home. Actually, I am trying to go home. I'm trying to go home to Vegas. That's what I'm trying to do here. So let's get this done, right? And I don't think, sometimes teams will think to themselves like, hey, let's give him one so we can celebrate at home. I wouldn't advise doing that. Not with these guys. Not with this Mavericks team. You don't give them hope. Don't willingly give them hope. If they make a million threes and the crowd goes crazy, I mean, it is what it is. But control what you can control, right? The right process, the right mentality, and locking in defensively. I think if they do that, I think our 23-24 season would be over.
Would be over, and we will have one more pod.
That's right.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's big. I think if you're Dallas, you're looking to play more desperate, right? You're looking to, in a way, trying to extend the series. You're trying to do something that 156 teams have tried and have never done, right? Come back from 0-3. But I think, like, if you're Boston, I think you look at best case scenario, win or lose, there's got to be something positive that we can
That's
take
right.
from this game to be able to bring back to Boston if we were, right? So, like, you want to treat this like the final game, right? Because, like, the worst thing you could do, especially with NBA players are super confident, eh? You don't want to give these guys any kind of hope. So I think, like, that's the important part. You want to take something from this game and just treat it like the closeout. We're not trying to get back and go play another game at home. We're trying to go celebrate. We're not trying to go play. Yeah.
I mean, things can degenerate very quickly, right? You lose game 4, you go to game 5 all confident, a bad call, an ejection, a bad tech. You lose game 5, now you're going home to game 6, and now everybody's turning around like, like, what's wrong with you? You're down 3-2. How are you feeling? Dallas crowd's gonna be crazy. This can degenerate quickly, so you want to nip in the buck. And I think it starts on defense, and I think. We'll see here. This is something to track. I think you spring a little more zone. I think you dare, especially when Dallas has kind of their two-way lineup. I think you spring more zone in a matchup way, and I think you dare Luka to make the pass, Kyrie to make the pass across, like bait them into trying to involve the role players, because they've already figured out a way to stop and not stop and contain them one-on-one. They've taken away the corner threes. You want to kick it a notch further? Invite them for turnovers. Invite them for bad passes. Invite them for no shot attempts, because they're trying to go late in the clock and there's nothing that's open. That's the third level of that defense that they could reach. And if they reach that, there's literally, I don't think there's any way they lose this game if they get to that level defensively.
Right. No, it'll be fun. It'll be fun. Josué, anything else you want to touch on? Or just in the last 2 minutes?
No, I'm conflicted. Because on one hand, I don't want the season to end. But on the other, I want to see good teams play good ball, and if the Celtics play well, I think the season will be over. So, regardless, we will have a post Game 4 podcast. I just hope that it's not for a controversial or something that's random, or I just hope we get a very good basketball game.
Yeah, I agree. Same thing with you. Josué Sédrjo, thank you. You got to go. So appreciate you, my friend, and we'll catch you right after Game 4.